wait till it's ready before I start the webinar, okay?
Okay, we should be ready.
You ready for me to kick off?
I think we're ready to kick off.
Good evening. My name is Carolyn Williams. I'm co-chair for the LA County Citizens Redistricting Commission, and I'd like to welcome you to our public workshop on Redistricting 2021. To get us started, would you please put in the chat, we'd like to know who's out there, your name, your organization, and your organization's focus. And I'm just waiting to see who's out there. Okay. Hi, Lewis from AARP. Luis. Russia Chavez. Community Health Councils, welcome. Salvadoran American Leadership and Educational Fund, SALEF, welcome. Gwendolyn Jones, President of Cherrywood Lemert Park Block Club. Ivan Garrigan, Leo Educational Fund. Hello, Jonathan Flores with Altamed Health Services. Martha Escadon, East LA Community Youth Center. Hi, Angie. Crystal Moselle, Champions for Progress, Faithful Central Bible Church.
Well, Carolyn, we probably could go on. I think that's a great intro. Nice turnout.
All right, so let's move ahead. We've got 2 polls we'd like to ask you to participate in. Poll number 1, would you write using from 1 to 4, 1 being the lowest, your level of understanding regarding redistricting? Are you here to learn? Somewhat knowledgeable. Number 3 would be knowledgeable, and 4, extremely knowledgeable. So here's our poll. And number 2, yeah, there are 2. And the second one looks at how important is redistricting for voter participation. The lowest, not important. 2, somewhat important. 3, important. And 4, extremely important. We'll take a moment, and when the results are in, we'll discuss that.
We have 6 more people. 5 more.
Hi, Roger from Topanga Association.
Okay, I think we've got our responses we're going to get. Hi, I'm Gayla Craig Hartzone. I'm the executive director for the CRC. And the results, can you all see them now? Can you see them?
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like 45% of people attending are somewhat knowledgeable, and then it increases from there to knowledgeable. 14% are extremely knowledgeable, but we have 23% who are here to learn. So we think we will have a nice balance here in terms of the mix. In terms of importance, this is terrific. The people who've turned out, 86% say redistricting is extremely important. And I know the commissioners today really want to help reinforce why it's so important and how you can all make a difference. So with that, Carolyn, I'm going to turn it back over unless there are any other observations on the results.
We just want to thank everybody for participating. And again, thank you for being here. Thanks, Gayla. Oh,
So back to Carolyn.
okay, looking for the next slide, please.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, so today what we'll be discussing, these are the topics. There are 4 areas. It's a new approach with the LA County CRC. We'll look at the significance, diversity, and the size of LA County, what makes it unique. We'll do an overview of the redistricting process. And most importantly, we want to talk about what your organization can do. So the new approach, what makes this new for LA County redistricting? In the past, the supervisors appointed an advisory boundary redistricting committee to study proposed changes to the boundaries. In the end, the supervisors could make revisions before adopting the final redistricting boundary. So what's not independent, they had input, they made the final decisions. The new approach, which was established for this year, is that we have a formation of citizens redistricting commission that will draw the boundary lines for the 5 single member supervisorial districts for the next 10 years. We're independent. There is no influence from the board. We do not report to the board. In fact, we have some restrictions. We don't talk to the board, their family members, or any of their staff. And we are reasonably representative of the diversity of the county. We represent you, the citizens and the citizens of LA County. Next slide, please. This is a trend for several California cities and counties to move to independent commissions, to pull that whole process away from those who would be directly have control over it. You'll see Santa Barbara County, San Diego County, as well as Los Angeles County. Cities such as Long Beach, San Diego, Oakland, Berkeley, and others are also moving to independent commissions for 2021. And next slide, please. So as independent commissioners, we had to meet certain qualifications. One of the things, as I said, we represent you, so we want to reflect the county's diversity, including its racial, ethnic, geographic, and gender diversity. We had to demonstrate that we possess certain experience, analytical skills, relevant to the redistricting process and voting rights, and ability to comprehend and apply the applicable state and federal legal requirements. We have to be impartial, and we want to appreciate the diverse demographics and geography of LA County. Again, we represent all areas of the county, and we also, as we say, we really appreciate LA County. We love living here. Political party preferences were not required to be exactly the same as the proportion of the political party, and we'll show a breakdown of that in the next slide. Okay, this is the process for the selection of commissioners. Phase 1, again, the county supervisors were not involved at all. The registrar, recorder, county clerk identifies the 60 most qualified applicants from a pool of 741 people who applied. 533 were qualified. They chose the 60 most qualified. The second phase was a randomly drawn process where one commissioner was drawn from each supervisorial district. Then 3 were randomly drawn from the remaining 55 applicants. So we started with 8 commissioners that were selected, and that 8 were responsible for selecting the final 6. I'm one of the final 6 who were selected. What they did is look at the remaining pool. They used an approach and rated them on a scale from 1 to 10. They narrowed it down because we wanted to represent the political party affiliations and the demographics of the county. And that created our 14 commissioners for the redistricting commission. Next slide. And this is who we are. Okay, you'll look at this in terms of we Again, as much as possible, we wanted to reflect the diversity, the ethnic diversity of the county, 43% Latinx, 21% Asian, 21% white, and 14% African American. And you see how close we mirrored the percent for LA County. We weren't quite there. We got as close as we could for gender. There was 50% in LA County. We have 6 female, 8 male, and then there's a breakdown for Democrats did not disclose, or independents and Republicans. As you can see, 57% of the commissioners are Democrats, 29% for, or we'll say independents, and 14% of Republicans. So again, the goal was to reflect the county's population. Next slide, please. One of the things that was important to us as we started to look at who we are and the important process in front of us was to define our values. What do we do? How do we conduct ourselves as we move about this important task? So we identified 5 values that we will hold ourselves to. The first one, and this is not in order of importance, but the first one is accountability. We're accountable to the process. We're accountable to each other to serve all the constituents of the county. Transparency. We're committed to openness in all aspects of the redistricting process. Objectivity. We are careful, we're intentional, fair-minded, and impartial, and will actively resist undue influence in establishing supervisorial district boundaries in an equitable manner. And we really made sure we got everything right about that. We are an independent council, and we want to make sure we remain that. Integrity was important. We're honest, truthful, ethical, principled, respectful, and professional in the work that we're doing. Inclusion and equity. We seek to create and foster a true sense of belonging. And this was really important, that we would not only just listen to you, but we wanted you to know that what we're creating, it's on a scale that you felt that you were listened to, you belong in the process. And we wanted to eliminate potential barriers by being purposeful, deliberate, and effective in our comprehensive public outreach, engagement, and feedback. And this process that we're doing today is a part of that public outreach, and there will be other opportunities for you to be engaged in the process and provide feedback. Okay, next slide, please.
So, Carolyn, before you pass it off, I think we might tell all the people attending, they have questions, they should put them into chat, and that we'll be looking at the questions after we get through the entire presentation. And Commissioner Saida Soto will be summarizing the questions so we can cover those at the end. So with that, we'll turn it over to Commissioner Morales.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Williams and to Gayla for that. So yes, my name is Apolonio Morales. I represent the 4th District. I'm your commissioner. And I'm going to be talking about the significance, diversity, and size of Los Angeles County. So let's begin. All right, so why is redistricting important? That's a question I ask myself too. What happens after the census, right? How are things decided? Who created these lines in the district? There's a lot of information to be found regarding that. We're going to touch upon some of that, but mostly what this is about is that after the census, we need to figure out what the balance is in terms of how many folks are living in the county itself, and how we have to explore. Are there more people in one particular area than there were before? Or are there less people? And how can we balance out some of these district lines? And so we want to make sure that we're reflective of the diversity of the population as well. We want to make sure that the districts themselves are equal in population. We're going to get into those numbers in just a little bit. And we want to make sure that every person has their vote counted. And so your voice at the ballot box actually means something when you're voting for that particular candidate or representative in your supervisorial district. So we want to make sure that folks' voices are heard. Next slide. And so continuing on, there's a lot of things that the county itself is in charge of. For instance, the public health and medical centers. There's also, the tax assessments for your home. There's also, the sheriff or law enforcement that falls under the purview of the county supervisors. And so in order to make sure that, you have a say in how these particular services are provided, or any thoughts or concerns or ideas about it, your representation counts. And so it's important to know who your supervisor is, but also important to know that you can express your voice directly to them in a way that's going to be mitigated and figured out fairly amongst all the different districts. Next slide. So as we all know, Los Angeles County is very complex in a good way, I would say. We are the most populous county in the United States. We have about 10 million people. We're a quarter of California's population. And so that's a significant portion of the state. We are the third largest metropolitan economy in the world. That means there's a lot of commerce. We have the ports here. We have a lot of trade. We have a lot of purchasing power. A lot of folks participating in that regard to keep our state functioning and actually help the rest of the nation with our GDP. And so this is important for us to note, because it does play into some of the complexities of that exist in Los Angeles County. We are also 88 cities and 100 plus unincorporated areas. And so there's different neighborhoods from the smaller neighborhoods or areas, in ethnic breakdowns, you name it, different cities. So we want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and their concerns are met. And then we are the most ethnically diverse of all the US counties, or one of the most ethnically diverse, I should say. If you're looking for any particular type of food, you're not going to have any trouble finding it here in Los Angeles County. And that's what the beauty of our county is. It's made up of different people from all walks of life, from all over the world. And so we like it that way. We like that diversity. Next slide. All right. So again, as I've mentioned, according to the US Census population estimates from July in 2019, we are at about 10,039,107 folks living in the county. We're going to have an official count somewhere down the line a few months from now, quite a number of months from now. But what we are trying to do is make sure that we're taking into consideration that there's about 2 million people in each of these districts. And so we have 5 supervisorial districts, each with an elected board supervisor. And in order to qualify for a board supervisor seat, you have to live in that particular supervisorial district. What's important to note, and a lot of questions that we're getting from folks is, are we going to get more supervisorial districts created out of this process? The answer to that question is no. The only way we can do that is if it would require voter approval in order to create more supervisorial districts. So right now we're only concerning ourselves with redrawing the 5 districts. All right, so we're going to provide a little historical context here, and I had to do my research on this because I knew the story was a little more complicated, but there has been a long history of discrimination against the Latino community. And so this is just kind of a little bit of a macrocosm, just looking at some of the history of this, is that traditionally, as the Latino population has grown or grew in LA County, the way that the district lines were being drawn were to split the votes and making it much more difficult for Latino representation amongst the county supervisors. And so there was a case called Garcia versus the County of Los Angeles that was brought upon by Maldiff as well, who worked on this. But looking back at the way that the district lines were drawn and back in 1981, they were able to challenge some of the notions in terms of how those decisions were made, and continuing the long-standing tradition of splitting the Latino vote. So, you could not get a Latino on the county board of supervisors. And so that went through a process. I'm a big fan of novelas. When I was a kid, I watched them with my mom. So if you're ever interested in researching this, it's quite the novela. And so things get challenged in the courts. And so the county fights it. And so that takes place around 1990. And so the map that's drawn gets challenged in the courts. And so it goes into the appeals process. And, at the end of the day, the US Supreme Court basically says, we're not going to hear this. The lower courts have already figured out that this has been a longstanding practice of discrimination, and it needs to be addressed. And so it goes back, the courts then, Judge Kenyon says you need to redraw the map. And so then the county supervisors redraw a map, and lo and behold, the map is still not a good map. And so that gets sent back to the drawing board. They say, do it again. And then, the story continues and on and on. But at the end of the day, finally, about a year and a half, 2 years later, this decision finally comes down that says, okay, so this is the new map. This is the good map now, for now. And so now you can have your special election. And that special election was the result, at the end of the day, was the first Latina county supervisor in Los Angeles County, and that was Gloria Molina. And so in 2001, knowing that this process was so, as kind of a contentious process, the US Department of Justice came in, and then they were supervising this process as well. This was still challenged at the end of the day. There was some complexities in it. There was some objection, related to the 2010 redistricting plan. And again, this is like a novella, right? So what has changed fundamentally is there was a challenge to the way the maps were drawn in 2010, but there was no federal court action that took place afterwards. I won't get into the ins and outs of all that, specifically just in terms of time, but it is important to note that now we have an independent redistricting commission that we are going to be drawing the maps based on the information that you provide to us. And so we want to make sure that we're listening to you as community organizations, representing different community members, in order to make sure that we're doing this the right way, and that we're making sure that the wrongs of the past are not going to be repeated in that same way, shape, or form. I think the next slide is a little bit more about Garza versus LA County. Again, I encourage you, if you're interested in this kind of case law, it's fascinating, very good dry read, but it is fundamentally, how our lives are shaped at the end of the day and who is represented. That's important. So I'll just leave it at that. I'll pass this on back to Co-Chair Williams.
Actually, I believe it's Dorina, Commissioner Wong.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, hi. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gayla. Thank you, Commissioner Morales. Good evening, everyone. My name is Commissioner Dorina Wong, and I represent District 3. I'd like to share with you kind of a redistricting overview so that you'll have a better sense of how the districting line should be drawn for the 5 county supervisorial districts. Next slide. So let's take a look at some of the rules that we should consider when we're trying to draw these lines. The US Constitution, the Voting Rights Act, state election laws. We need to follow these criteria, and then I'll go into the order of priorities of how to make sure the lines are drawn fairly and correctly. So I'm quickly going to go over them first, and then I'll go into them in a little more detail, each of them. So first, let's look at the first priority. So each district should be reasonably equal or approximately equal in terms of the total number of county residents in each district, right? Within about a 10% deviation or so that's allowable under the Voting Rights Act. The second criteria would be that we should comply with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which basically takes into account race and ethnicity. The third thing, issue or priority to look at is that the district should be what we call geographically contiguous, that is connected to each other. And the fourth criteria, we should look at the kind of the geographic integrity of small entities like the city or a local neighborhood or a local community of interest. So they should be more or less, if we can, minimize the division of those small, those entities. And then the fifth, to the extent that we can, and as long as it doesn't conflict with the 4 prior criteria, we can make sure that the districts are more or less compact. They're not spread out too much. But when we're looking at all of these criteria, we should also make sure that the districts do not favor or disfavor an incumbent, like a sitting supervisor, a political candidate, or political party. Next slide. So let's look at what we mean by an equal population. So many of you were probably involved in the census 2020 last year, or at least you probably participated in it and filled out the form. So the census is constitutionally mandated to be done every 10 years so that the lines for representatives for local, state, and federal jurisdictions can be redrawn to reflect the changes in the population. So our county districts will be based on the total population as reported by the Census 2020. And for LA, as Commissioner Morales mentioned, each district will be about 2 million residents, which is much larger than some states. So if you look at the figure at the right, you'll see that there's ways to draw the lines, and there's different concentrations of populations. And so some district lines will be larger, in area, but more or less the number of residents would be approximately equal. Next slide. So that's what we mean by equal population. Now let's look at race and ethnicity, or what is required under the Voting Rights Act. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, next slide. So when we're looking at the Voting Rights Act, there's a basic rule under the Voting Rights Act is just not to go and set out to hurt voters based on their race or ethnicity. As you can see on the map, there's different populations, and those populations shift a lot every 10 years. So let's take a look at some of the questions that you might ask in order to make sure that you're not, like hurting or discriminating against minority voters. First, you might ask, are there sizable, relatively concentrated minority communities? So again, if you look at that map, you'll see that, let's say, if you look at the purple, if you look at the purple areas, that's reflective of the white population. If you look at the black or the blue areas, that's concentrations of the black populations. If you look at the orange areas, that's the Latino population, and the green areas are Asian populations. So that is how, you can see where there's concentrations of minority populations. And so we would just have to take that into account. So then what the other question you can ask is, do the minority communities have distinct electoral preferences? What that means is there voter cohesion among that minority population, right? Or is there voter polarization? That is, do they vote differently than the white population? Third, let's look and see if those underrepresented minorities have faced discrimination, either currently or in the past. I think Commissioner Morales gave you a perfect example of this in the Garcia case, when the Latino community had been unable to elect a candidate of their choice for many years. And, by being split, and they only resolved it through a lawsuit. And then finally, the fourth question we can ask is, can we design a district to give a minority a fair shot at electing a candidate of their choice? I'm still on the prior slide. Yeah, there we go. So again, in that Garza case, we saw that once the Latino community was able to finally elect a Latino woman to the Board of Supervisors, they finally, after having been locked out for many years. Next slide. So now you can go to the next slide. So now let's take a look at how you can see how redistricting can take away minority rights, right? So if you look at this figure, you'll see, let's say if the gray figure reflects white voters and the brown figure reflects minority voters. If you drew the line so that there is only 1/4 of the minority population in each district, that would be what we would be calling diluting the vote. And so then it's unlikely that that minority population could vote for a candidate of their choice. Next slide. Now, if you look and see how we can possibly put the minorities population together and concentrate them more so that they can make up 3/4 of a district, you can see how now that minority population would be able to elect a candidate of their choice. And so that would be much better than splitting them up. So next slide. Let's look at a third criteria that we should consider. So that is to look to make sure that all parts of the district are are what we call contiguous or connected, right? So if you look at the figure on the right, you'll see, the non-contiguous, they're split, right? You can't have, a district with, part of the population be divided and then another population far away. We want it to be connected and contiguous. Even if it's connected by a little bit, it has to be connected somehow. Let's see what else we should consider. Next slide. So as I was saying, there's different kind of entities that you can look at and to try to keep together. So you can look at cities, neighborhoods, and communities of interest. So I think it is a little more straightforward when we're talking about cities, because cities have boundaries, and we know the cities, in LA County, but there's 88 of them, as Commissioner Morales said, and LA City is huge. And so it's very difficult. Hi, the presentation will come on again. But at any rate, you saw, at any rate, there's cities, neighborhoods, and communities of interest. And so when we're looking at that, as I said, the cities are a little easier because they're boundaries, but neighborhoods can be interpreted many different ways. And so sometimes, like if you saw the figure, you could see that the LA Times may define neighborhoods a certain way. There is, you could define neighborhoods by neighborhood councils, or you could define, a smaller, a community of interest, a local community of interest, right? So that community, that community of interest is a contiguous population that shares common social and economic interests, and they should be included in a single district for purposes of having effective and fair representation. So we would try to keep a community of interest together, and then that is where I think a lot of you would come in, because you would help us identify, those neighborhoods or those communities of interest that you think our commission should consider keeping together. Now, again, we can't, include relationships with political parties, incumbents, and political candidates, but we certainly do want to know what your thoughts are about neighborhoods and communities of interest. Next slide. And then when we're talking about the fifth kind of criteria, I mentioned, whenever it's practical, we would want a compact district, right? We want a district that's not kind of dispersed or contorted, but as much as possible, taking into account the prior criteria. If it's compact, then that would be, that would be ideal. And then finally, I think I had mentioned that we should not really consider partisan favoritism, right? We shouldn't favor one or discriminate against the other. So if you look, there's always different ways to draw the lines. If you look at the figure, on the right there, you can see if it's 60% are blue and 40% are red. Now, if we just went and just cut it through, and divided it, evenly, but the middle figure there shows that actually if we drew the lines that way, then the blue would always win, right? But there's a way to draw it so that in the third figure, you can actually see that there are three it's possibilities where the red would win 3 times and the blue would win 2 times. So these are just all the considerations that we have to take into account. So when we're drawing the lines, we have to balance all these different factors, take into account all these criteria to just make sure that the lines are fair and equitable. And most, I think importantly, we have to make sure that those that are living in each district can elect a candidate of their choice. So, that's kind of a quick summary of, the different things that we are going to consider and that we hope you consider, and that you will help us when we're trying to draw the lines. So I think I'm going to turn over the presentation over to Commissioner Jean Franklin, who will show you why it's so very important to draw the lines, taking into account all of these factors. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Commissioner Wong. My name is Jean Franklin, and I'm Commissioner representing District 2. This workshop, educational workshop, is directed to leaders, community-based organizations and faith-based organizations, which are ministers, pastors, and so forth. The reason why we are having this educational workshop is because you all are influencers, okay? And we need your help. We're hoping that you would take this information that we're giving you today and share it with your different organizational networks, and also with your with the members of your church and congregation. It's very important that we get the word out, and it's very important that every citizen's voice is heard. So I will be very brief, but I would like for you to take a look at this picture. And it is a rhetorical question that I will be asking you. Can you tell me where this picture was taken? All right. So if anybody want to take a stab at it, you can put it in the chat. But let me know where you think this picture was taken. Okay, but I'll give you a couple of seconds. But because my time is limited, let me tell you, this picture was taken in Watts. In 2001, there was a freak weather storm, a hailstorm in Watts, and hail came down, rain came down, snow came down in Watts, was about 1 foot deep. And as you know, Watts is located in South Los Angeles. It borders the unincorporated area of Willowbrook and Compton. It has a population of maybe 35,000 people. However, that Watts only covers about 2 square miles. After that snowstorm, the citizens of Watts needed services. They needed help. So they reached out to their representatives. However, come to find out that Watts was cut or drawn into 4 districts. Out of 2 square miles, Watts was drawn into 4 districts. So when an individual citizen reached out to who they thought their representative was, the representative said, "No, I'm sorry, I'm not your representative. Why don't you try representative such and such?" So that went on. The people in Watts could not identify their representative, and lo and behold, the representative themselves could not confirm on whether the particular citizens were in their districts. So you can see the importance of districts, keeping a district whole. The next slide, please, if you can. Now, what happened was in 2011, there was a hearing with the California Citizens Commission. And there were testimonies taken from citizens from Watts giving a historical account of what went on after that 2001 freak storm, and the citizens within that district could not get the services that they needed. So in 2011, they made, when I say they, the state legislators made Watts whole. Another thing too, that I don't have a slide for this, but very briefly, after the Rodney King riots in Koreatown, the citizens in Koreatown needed resources and help because of the aftermath of the riots. In Koreatown, Koreatown only represented the geographical square mile was actually 1 mile, 1 square mile. And within that 1 square mile, Koreatown was divided up as well into 4 geographical districts, and they had 4 city council members. And it was difficult for those citizens to get the resources and the help that they needed as well. So we're sharing this information to the faith-based leaders and the community-based leaders for you to get actively involved. Share this information with members of your congregation, and we'll have another commissioner talk about that and how you can get involved. But it's very important that your voice is heard. It's very important that each citizen's voice is heard, because that way we can make sure that incumbents that are currently holding office will not have the power to draw lines to keep themselves in position of political power. And that's the great thing about the LA County Citizens Redistricting, because we are independent. So it's no longer in the purview of the supervisors, but it's in the purview now of the citizens and the commission. I'll now give it over to the next commissioner. Thank you.
And allow me to just apologize for the internet disruption. And if there is a problem, Ty has the slides now and he can project them. I don't know why the internet became unstable on my end. So Commissioner Orpinella Segura.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Priscilla Orpinella Segura, and I serve as one of your commissioners from Supervisorial District 1. So I want to thank you for being with us today and learning about this process. I'll be going over what your organization can do to spread awareness. So by the end of this section, you'll know how and when to become involved. Feedback from our communities is at the center of the redistricting process, and we want to ensure that the process is transparent and inclusive of all people, including voices and communities that have been historically marginalized and intentionally left out, as we learned from other commissioners earlier. Our goal as an independent body is to adopt maps that represent our communities with their input and without the influence of outside parties. And more importantly, that these districts are drawn equitably. So this effort wouldn't be possible without the help of organizations and cities and other nonprofits and religious entities like yours. We need your help. And you can be a part of history by becoming involved. We've seen how a community can progress if there's direct involvement from the people. To encourage you to make history with us by becoming involved. Next slide. So there are numerous ways that your organization can foster participation, starting with informing and educating residents about the importance of the redistricting process, encouraging public input, partnering with communities that are geographically concentrated to ensure that everyone does have a voice, both organizations and residents to submit maps when the time does come. For individual people, there are also ways that they can get involved. Next slide. Starting with attending workshops and public hearings. So we will have 7 public forums and 7 public hearings at a minimum from May to July, 2 at a minimum in the fall. Right now, the workshops are planned to be virtual, but we'll see where the pandemic takes us. Next slide. So you'll see all the public hearings. What you'll see is that each supervisor has a public forum and public hearing. And I do want to stress that although our different Senate supervisor districts, it's open to everyone. These are a lot of dates, so please don't worry about not being able to jot all of them down. If you don't have an opportunity to take a picture or finish writing, they are available on the redistricting website. And I do, if you can go back, I do want to distinguish between the forums and the public hearings. So the forums are meant to be a little more conversational and a fluid approach, an opportunity to together and talk, whereas the public hearings have a more structured format in that it does follow an agenda process, and to submit comments, it goes through a public comment process. And I want to stress that if you want to receive updates on when these dates are taking place, please sign up to receive notifications on the website. Next slide. As I've mentioned before, this is a collaborative process, and we're here to support you and to support each other. So we will be toolkits to organizations complete with talking points, social media posts, flyers, and much more. And they will be available in to ensure that we are inclusive of all communities. If there's something that your organization needs that is not part of the toolkit, please reach out to us because we will accommodate your need. Next slide. During your outreach efforts, you may help folks understand the redistricting process by linking it back to the census. So last year's decennial census was really different than other years in that it was the first time that the count was completed predominantly online. So while advantageous to some groups, it can put groups at a disadvantage. It was also extended due to the pandemic, and extension particularly impacts our timeline. I know there was a question in chat as to when the data would be released. So the information we have is that the census would release the data in September, but just a week or so ago, the legislature did send us a letter indicating to see if an interim data product could be used, which would be issued late August, and then it would take a month to be available to the commission. However, the letter indicates that there are some complications with using the interim data product, in that the information that would be released is a little more complicated, less refined. So as we continue receiving that information, we will share with the public. Next slide. And now I want to talk about what we've done and when we're going. We've formally the commission, which you've met some of us on the commission. If you haven't met everyone, I encourage you to attend our regularly scheduled commission meetings. We've also the public outreach plan, and looking ahead in the summer, we'll continue we'll commence the public outreach. In the fall, the census data will be released and become available, and the redistricting software will be available for public use. In October through November, we anticipate to receive the maps from communities, and we'll hold an additional 2 public hearings at a minimum, as I shared earlier. And last, we do have a target date of December 15th to submit those maps. I hope this was helpful for you to learn how to become involved. Like I shared, there are numerous ways you can become involved. I also want to share that we do have social media profiles, so please make sure to look up LA County Redistricting. And now for the next slide, we encourage you to take a poll. How can we help? So Kayla, if you can put the poll up. Not sure if you're seeing the poll, but essentially what we'd like to ask is, what are the needs that we can fulfill? How can we help you by staying informed and participating if you'd like to attend the CRC meetings? I think we'll give everyone a little more time to their poll.
Half have responded.
I encourage you to please complete this poll.
We're at 65%.
35 more, please do. Mark those check boxes. The feedback we receive from you is really going to help us. LA County is so huge. So we need involvement from as many organizations as possible to ensure that the district maps reflect our community's needs.
Okay, I think it's time to share. So we have 90% are going to continue to stay informed and participate. We've got about a quarter that will attend CRC meetings. 87% will help to inform and educate their members and residents. 70% will work with communities of interest. 83% will promote attendance to the public forums and public hearings. 63% are actually going to help promote the importance and help collaborate to submit maps. And then we have some other ideas that maybe we'll hear about during the Q&A. So I'll turn it back to the group now in terms of questions. Why don't we just turn it over to Commissioners?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those who have joined. And just to start off with one question that I think maybe we can expand on. There is a question about what kind of input are we looking for from community, and how will we be collecting that feedback? So this may be, we can talk a little bit more about the hearings and the forums and what information or how community might engage in those, and how we'll take that information back for the purpose of creating these maps. So I open it up. Maybe Commissioner Orpinela Segura, you can kick us off.
Sure. Let me open up the question to make sure that I do have it. So in terms of community input, what we are looking for is sample maps, and formally those should be submitted through the public workshops, which there were different dates available. The forums is more conversational, more fluid, but to formally have those documented and submitted into the process, it would be through the public workshops. And other community input that we are looking for in addition to the maps is any areas of perhaps that you see, and I'm not sure if other commissioners have more feedback as to.
I would suggest that you can make public comments is extremely important. Both written public comments as well is extremely vital. And if you can attend the meetings for the commissioners every second and fourth Wednesdays, that would be extremely helpful. Another idea as well is you can get together with your various organizations and come up with your own ideas and draw your own maps. That way you can give your input that way. Another idea as well is to attend our other additional educational workshops that we'll be doing. There will be educational workshops on maps, how to identify maps, how to draw maps. So attend those workshops. So this outreach committee that's part of the commission, that's what we will be providing as well. So that's one way. So you're starting right in the very beginning and you're learning along with the commissioners. So we're learning together. And as we give out these educational forums, you learn, then you take it back to your various groups and then give your input and give it directly to the commissioners, both written and or verbally during the various commission meetings.
And I'd like to add, when you mention they can draw their own maps, we will make available the software and training for drawing maps. So it's not like, how do I do that? We will help you, provide support for you in drawing those maps and getting them to us, because we need you to help identify what we're calling the communities of interest, because we want to make sure when we start to draw these districts, we're including your feedback. And the more you can help us understand who's out there and what's important, the more we can draw maps that represent you.
Commissioner Williams, great segue to the next question. And maybe Gayla, you can help answer this question, which is around when we might expect the redistricting software to be available.
Yeah, so right now what we're targeting at, the county just acquired the software and they are going to be refining it. We have to hold the first 7 public hearings with the public forums before we draw any maps. So the launch for the software probably will be July. There'll be workshops in July and August on how to use the software. If we start getting some of the legacy data in mid-August, even mid-September, people could start working with it as we compile this 2020 census data into it. We're hoping as organizations develop maps, they'll submit them on a real-time basis so the commission can be looking at them. We're also going to be retaining a demographer and mapping consulting services to help guide this whole process.
Thank you, Gayla. And then follow up, that's sort of pertaining to what at the end will be the impact of these maps on the sitting Board of Supervisor members. So I can take, well, go ahead, Commissioner Morlack.
I was going to say maybe a little more clarity. So is it county districts or city districts?
Board of Supervisors. Will our redistricting process have, if any, on the current, on the sitting Board of Supervisors?
Oh, sitting. Okay. Well, that's, based on the feedback that we get from the community organizations and community members and groups and faith-based organizations. And, those lines may shift. It's hard to determine what the electoral outcomes of that is going to be or anything at this point in time, but we are taking into consideration drawing lines that are fair. And so we want to make sure that we hear from you to be able to help us and guide us in terms of what makes the most sense in drawing those lines.
Right. And also,
Go ahead.
The census data, everything will be taken according to what the census data reveals. So that is extremely important. So we don't know until the census data comes out how things will look. And then taking into consideration the community's input.
And then just in the interest of time, Gayla, maybe you can share a little bit about how people can submit maps.
So that process still needs to be developed. The steps will be, we'll bring on a demographer. We're hoping that one would be selected in mid-May. The software would become available. And with the software, there will be instructions on how to submit. Individuals will be able to create their own account. It's going to be in a cloud. It's free. They can go in and out of the account. They can form a group of people to work on maps. Once they're comfortable with what they've drawn, they can hit submit. And then you as a commission will be receiving it. It can be made available to the public. We're assuming probably the demographer will have worked with you in terms of criteria, and we'll start bundling the maps. And they'll say, these are all maps that are thinking about placement of Santa Clarita or Palmdale, or placement of Long Beach versus Whittier, so that you as commission can look at these maps around themes to consider them. You probably will start looking at submitted maps, depending upon how fortunate we are with the census data, sometime in late September through October into November. Commissioner Orpanella Segura had mentioned that we just did get news from the Census Bureau that they can provide this rough cut of data. It's the 2020 census data, but what they will be using is sort of the template from 2011, but it's current data. The good news is I talked to LA County folks who are developing the maps and the data formats to be imported into this new software. And apparently they had to do this in 2011. And they said even though the state says it's highly complex, they've done it before and they feel comfortable that they'll be able to work with this data. So hopefully we may have usable data before September 30th.
Thank you, Gayla. And I know we are at time and there's really great questions. So Gayla, is it possible for us to take some of these questions that are unanswered and respond to them in email or on the website?
We can do that, or see if the commissioners are willing to take another 5-10 minutes to go through these questions. Are you all willing? And Steph's sign, this is yes.
Yes.
I think we should stay on as long as we have an audience and we have such wonderful questions. Was the question covered about how to get presentations for groups yet?
No.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay. I didn't know if I was bounced off at that point or not.
So let me ask another question. Maybe you can answer both of those. One question is, what flexibility might there be in our timeline, given that the census data is delayed? And then, of course, how can groups request a presentation?
So this might be an interesting topic for you all to attend the next CRC meeting, because we are going to be talking about legislative options to propose to the state legislation to give some relief in terms of the timeline. Right now, the CRC is mandated that we have to finish the maps by December 15th.
Right.
We have very strict timelines from the point of when the census data are released up until that December 15th. So we're going to be discussing in the next meeting some ways to maybe enable us to collapse some of the requirements so we still go through them, but we can give the public more time to give input. So that could be a very interesting conversation for people to enter into. Right now, it's going to be a really tight deadline if the census data does not come till September 30th. I mean, that is the reality, and we hope by doing the training with the public on how to use the software, they can play with some of the data, but no official maps can be drawn until we have the official Census 2020 data. That's why we're hoping this legacy data set coming in late August could help.
Great, thank you. And Co-Chair Williams, I think you might have something to add. I see you unmuted.
Oh, I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, let me ask this question, which is regarding the demographer and what engagement or access community might have or will have to the demographer.
On what about the demographer?
What kind of access or engagement will community have, if any, with the demographer?
So the demographer is hired for supporting the CRC. The demographer is going to have access to all the public hearings and public information. There is an RFP on this that we've issued, and it's on our website if anybody knows of demographers who'd like to apply. Most of their work is going to start. There's going to be an oral presentation May 12th for the commission to hear the finalists. Hopefully in May they will select one. The demographer will begin working in June on. The demographer should help answer questions, should help with the training, the use of the software. how to submit maps. We also have Ty V. Lee, who's the clerk, who also can help with some of the technical aspects in terms of the GIS mapping. I don't think we want to put any of the groups in a position where we're trying to give them advice of what the map should be. We want to hear from the groups. So we'll be providing technical support to outside groups. For you
Speaking
as
of-
commissioners, they'll help draw your maps.
And speaking of technical support, there's a question around what other ways that are non-technical can community provide input through?
So we will accept maps that are old Thomas guide maps that you may have seen in the past that were little booklets, and you could circle and draw a line and say, this is where I want my neighborhood to be. My understanding also and how the software, so you could scan it and you could email it to us and we would give it to the demographer to include. We understand with the software, you may not want to look at how to redistrict all 5. You may just want to focus on your community. So you could just submit, my understanding, I haven't seen the software yet, so you can just submit what kinds of adjustments you might want to have in your own community and leave the rest of the county the way it is for submission consideration.
Great. Go ahead, Commissioner Wong.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to one of the questions. I don't know if we actually answered it. One of the questions was, will the new redistricting affect the supervisors that are now in office, or will it be accomplished by a new election? I believe that it will be the new the next election that the supervisors will be facing will have the new lines. So it'll be the next election that the supervisors will be in, just to clear that up.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe one last question to take. And so any last tips that we might have for our partners, for those of us who are organizers on the commission, on what are some best ways to engage community, faith-based community and community at large in a process such as this?
I encourage to open the conversation by talking about the effects of the redistricting process. Commissioner Franklin shared the Watts story, shared the Koreatown story. Those are true life examples of how individuals in the community have been impacted. I think by starting with those examples, you have an opportunity to get the interest of the community that you're talking. And then comes the educational portion about what their input does to the redistricting process.
And I would also like to encourage you to not work alone, but look at, I would say, strength in numbers. Are there other organizations that you might be able to partner with to identify communities of interest, or even to draw the map? So that's another way, or even to get people to talk about the process and get people interested. And I know I'm using an example of someone I know who was able to pull together a coalition to talk about redistricting and to hear about it and to spread the word out into their community. So I would encourage you to get involved in the process as well.
Yeah. And finally, I would encourage everyone, particularly the faith-based community, to hold your own community education workshop regarding redistricting, utilizing the tools, the toolkits that we have. And that way you can educate your own collaborators and your community and get them involved, and then direct them to the Community Redistricting Commission to attend those meetings. That way, it multiplies itself.
And if I could add one more thing, Commissioner Franklin had a great point in hosting your own events. And I would stress to hold more than one. I come from a communications background and know that success is a drumbeat. So the more you talk about something, it becomes a household name. That's how the census did part of their tactic, is to frequently talk about it so that people were comfortable with the process, which encouraged participation. So as much as possible, try to make the redistricting process a household conversation, something that happens on a frequent basis.
Thank you so much. Really great. And I'll just share that we are extremely interested in making sure that we reach communities that are generally excluded from these critical processes. And so we really hope that you will partner with us. There is in the chat, Commissioner Wong has included the website link so that you can add yourself to our listserv and we can stay in communication with you. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Commissioner Williams to just close off.
Yes.
Actually, can I just add? Could I just add one thing? I think that because this is kind of linked to the question about how people can get us request speakers. And so we have not, I guess we as a commission don't have a formal process for that, but I think we can bring it back to our committee to try to create a process, because we would like to help get the word out. And we would, I think we already have, one of our commissioners has already gone out to speak at one of these, public forums. And I think many of us would be willing to do that as well.
I was just going to offer before we sign off, if you want to have a commissioner come and present to an organization, you can go to our website and you'll find my email. It's grhartso@crc.lacounty.gov. We also encourage you to work with constituents. My understanding is in the past, the strongest maps were submitted by cities, by CBOs, by faith-based groups, by people who knew the communities, and really brought together groups of people to come and present thoughtful ways of realigning the district lines. So this commission really wants to hear from you all and hear your ideas, and to help you engage your groups of stakeholders to submit.
So I want to thank everybody for attending. And again, we represent you. We're here to hear from you. So thank you for this. And please follow us. Our website is there. And hopefully you'll attend another one of our sessions and maybe our meetings. So thank all the commissioners for participating today. And I guess this is it. Let's say bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.